So for this video, I'm going to be doing my September wrap-up. I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read and all of the books that I DNF'd in the month of September. September was a pretty good month, although like I said, I did have some DNFs, quite a few of them. I'll talk about them, but I also found some really good books and had some fun rereads. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. I'm going in no order, just the books, or the order that I have the books stacked up here. So the last book I actually read in September was Age of Legend. And this was a fun reread for me because on Sunday, me and Stacy and our dog Ozzy, we drove all the way to Indiana in a day and we almost managed to finish this entire book. We had just like 2 chapters left when we got home. So I think the next day I finished it. So I did finish it in September just before the Dark Tower readathon started. So that was good. And yeah, this isn't one of my favorites in the series. This actually might be my least favorite, but it's still a really good book. I think the main thing that keeps it a little bit lower is just that there's not a lot of real plot progression, but you still get the amazing character work in this book, and then there's some fun reveals at the end. It's a really good book, and it's obviously one of my favorite fantasy series, but it's a 4-star book, not quite as good as some of the best in the series, but it was a fun reread. Yeah, a lot of fun. And I probably should have started with this one first. Age of War. This is the 3rd book in Legends of the First Empire series. There's a hair on it. And I finished this at the beginning of the month because I was supposed to have read it in August, but I read it, I think, probably like September 1st or 2nd. And this is definitely one of the best in the series. There's a lot of great stuff that happens in this book. It's called Age of War for a reason. It's a lot of stuff going on and a lot of character deaths, if you can imagine so, with it being war. And yeah, it's really good. Probably my second favorite in the series. The first one is still my favorite, which might be an unpopular opinion, but I love both of them. And yeah, this is definitely a highlight of the series. Book 3, Age of War. And speaking of fantasy series, I read book 2 and 3 of the sequels to The Bone Dolls Twin, which was one of the most unique fantasy books I'd ever read. I read the sequels, Hidden Warrior and The Oracle's Queen. And these were both very good. I've given all 3 books in the series 4 stars. And I think it's one of those things where if I reread it, because I tend to reread my favorite fantasy series, if you couldn't tell from Legends of the First Empire. But I do like to reread fantasy series, especially my favorites. And I think upon a reread, these books will just get better and better for me. Like I said, this is kind of a weird fantasy series. And if you don't know the premise of the Bone Dolls Twin, kind of the idea is that there's these warrior queens that were kind of ruling the land. But then this guy comes along and basically just wipes out a lot of them and it starts to kill off a lot of female like princesses and babies so that the men can start to rule again. But at the beginning of the story, there's these twins that are born. One's a girl, one's a boy. The boy is killed off, and by magic the girl baby is turned into a boy, and at the prophecy is that at some point in her life she will then turn into a man and will rule the world essentially. So that's the premise, which is kind of bonkers in and of itself. And the story is basically just of that young boy, girl, Tobin, his life. And, you get more of it in here. And obviously, might be a spoiler, but she eventually turns into a woman. And just, yeah, it was a wild ride. It was very interesting. One of the most just different fantasy trilogies I've ever read. Very solid series if you want to read something that's beautifully written. I don't normally care about like the actual writing, but the prose in this book is really good. It was written in like the early to mid 2000s, so it's not like super modern, but also not super classic either. Kind of in the middle, I would assume. It's just really good, really intriguing, and I would highly recommend it to anyone who hasn't read it yet. I also reread one of my favorite Ray Bradbury collections. Not an all-time favorite, but still solid, at least for me. Driving Blind by Ray Bradbury, which was our September pick for the Ray Bradbury Book Club. And if you don't know, we are doing a Ray Bradbury Book Club. 1 book a month, a random Bradbury, either collection or book or novella or whatever. And this was our pick for September. I think most people thought this was a good and okay collection. Certainly not up to par with like the Martian Chronicles and the Illustrated Man. And then October, we're going to be doing October Country. Definitely not up at that level, but for me, it's still a solid 4 stars. I'm sorry, excuse me. But for me, it's still a solid 4-star collection. It's just got a bunch of random stories. Sometimes his collections can kind of have a theme. Like The Illustrated Man was a lot of sci-fi. October Country is a lot of thriller and horror. Martian Chronicles obviously deals with Mars and space travel. This one is just kind of all over the place. They're random. They're kind of goofy at times, but I had a fun time. 4 stars. And yeah, really liked it. I guess I should start getting to some of these DNFs, by the way, because how many? Oh, I had 2. I thought I had 3 DNFs, but I guess I only had 2. Let's start with one of them, which was actually Andrew from Andrew's Wizardly Reads, his Patreon pick. He's one of my Patreon members, and he originally picked Lord of a Shattered Land by Howard Andrew Jones. And initially, I was intrigued, and this was also a book that I had to read only physically, and I was enjoying it a little bit, like first couple of chapters, but then I quickly realized, oh, it's one of these kind of fantasy stories where I typically don't like it. Basically, every chapter of the book, like something new is happening. Like the character has like another side quest to do. Like every chapter is its own story essentially. And typically with fantasy, I've just tended to notice that I don't like that kind of writing style. The same thing happened in Black Tongue Thief by Christopher Bowman. Like every chapter, the character's doing something different. Like I kind of need some sort of progression, some sort of overarching plot, I guess, in a fantasy book. And this one, for me, didn't really have that. And I wasn't really a big fan of the main character or really any of the characters. I know a lot of people love this book, including Andrew. Sorry, Andrew, but it just wasn't up to. It's not my kind of book. So I DNF'd it. So I might as well talk about Andrew's second pick, but because typically I try not to DNF Patreon members' picks. And if you don't know, I do have a Patreon, and if you are a member, your name gets put on the wheel. And if you win, you get to pick a random book for me to read. And Andrew's pick was that book, but I DNF'd it, so I let him choose another book, which was much better. Sufficiently Advanced Magic by Andrew Rowe. Also funny that Andrew's both picks have the name Andrew in them. Suspicious. But yeah, this book was really good. I gave it 4 stars. It's the first book in the Arcane Ascension series, which I'm led to believe has a lot of books in the series, and I will be continuing because this was a fun book, and also it's also just fun that me and Andrew can agree on a fantasy book because, sometimes we disagree. But this was a really fun book, and also surprising that it was a school setting. I did not know about that going into it. And typically, I don't like really fantasy school settings either. There are exceptions like Poppy War. But this one was really good. I really enjoyed the main character. I enjoyed really all of the characters, really. And just kind of the progression of things that happen. Because this is, I guess, what you would call progression fantasy, where all these kids are in school and they're starting to realize like what kind of magic they can do, and they're trying to level up essentially. And yeah, the story was good. The characters were compelling. I really enjoyed it, and I will be continuing sometime in the near future or distant future. This one was really good. Good job, Andrew. And yeah, I really liked it. Now, the other DNF that I had, I'll before I even say anything, this was a 700-page book, and I DNF'd it at the 500-page mark, which I rarely ever do. But the story started off so good, so promising, and then it just kind of fell off a cliff, and I did not care. And that book would be A Brief History of 7 Killings by Marlon James. And I wouldn't say this is a typical read for me. Typically, I love, fantasy, sci-fi, thriller, horror. Those are kind of like my main genres. But every once in a while, I will go out of my comfort zone just to read a random book that I don't really know too much about. The only thing I knew about this book going in is that it's kind of centered around the assassination attempt of Bob Marley, which had me very intrigued, and I figured it would have a lot of cool musical references in here, and it would just be a compelling read. And that's what it started out being. Like, the first couple hundred pages were really intriguing. The writing style, if you don't know Marlon James, he's the same author that wrote that kind of literary fantasy book, Black Leopard, Red Wolf, I think it's what it's called. And so this is one of his previous books. Definitely literary. You got a lot of characters to keep track of, and you've got some Jamaican characters and kind of their, accents in the story kind of can be hard to read at times. So I did kind of an immersion read, definitely with this book, audio and physical. But you have some other characters too. And basically, it's written in 5 parts. The first 2 parts, part 1 is the day before the assassination attempt. Part 2 is the day of, which were really good. Those 2 parts would have been like 4.5 stars. Really good. After that, it's not really about any of that, and you're just following all these random characters throughout their lives. And then you get to part 4, which page 500. I won't get into it here, but there's some weird stuff that I was not expecting. And I was like, you know what? I read the part of the book that I care about, and now we're on to this other part that I really don't care about at all. So sadly, I did DNF it 500 pages in, which again is a rare thing for me to do, but I just did not give a crap. Which is sad because the first part of this book was excellent, and then it just fell off a cliff. But yeah, so it's a weird book. I did DNF it. Oh well. What the hell else did I read in September? I gotta find out here. Oh yeah, duh. I read The September House by this author, Carissa Orlando, which is a debut. That's probably why I didn't remember. This book came out last year in September, and now this is our September pick, obviously, for our Thrill, Chill, or Kill book club we do every month. We pick a random horror or thriller once a month, and this is our pick for September. And this book was very promising. It started off very well. You've got this main character that's just very interesting, and just, she's making all these excuses about this haunted house that she lives in. And she's like, oh, all this weird stuff is happening, but I bought this house. It's mine. I got to deal with it. There's people all go through struggles all the time. It's very interesting because normally you get people that move in and they're either skeptical that things are happening, or they want to get out of there right away. But this person just knows what's happening, and they're just like, you know what? I'm going to deal with it. And I thought that was pretty funny. This book starts out in a very comical way, I would say. It almost reads like a sitcom, kind of. But then it definitely just shifts in tone, a good way in. And then you get some reveals about what's happening, and it's very painfully obvious what's going on. But then, I don't know, just this book should have just stuck with one thing, but it tried to do too many things. And for that, it did. I was on the struggle bus with it by the end. Overall, I did give it 3.5 stars, just because the beginning was so strong and the main character was very compelling. But overall, the author just tried to do too many things, which is fine. It's a debut author. Hopefully her next books will be much better and more kind of cohesive. But this first book of hers was good, but not probably as good as it could have been. And then my last book that I have to talk about, excluding rereads, because obviously a lot of those are going to get 5 stars, but this was probably my favorite book of the month, which is very surprising because I did not expect that with this book. And that would be Brother by Anya Alborn. And this book definitely surprised me. When I think this was Brand's pick. Every month on the Book Astronomer Discord, I do a kind of a random number generator game where everybody on the Discord can choose a number between 1 and 100, and whoever gets closest gets to choose a book for me to read in the following month. And Brand, I believe this was his pick. And sometimes me and Brand don't agree a lot on books, especially horror books, but this book was excellent. And when I was first reading it, I was enjoying it. It wasn't really quite what I expected it to be. If you don't know, the premise is kind of, a very stereotypical horror trope of this weird family in West Virginia, live deep in the mountains, and weird stuff's going on, and they're killing people. It's that kind of book. But you get the perspective of a guy in the family who participates in all this weird stuff, this horrible stuff, but he doesn't really enjoy it, and he kind of wants to get out. And then you kind of figuring out more about his family and his past, and then these other girls that he's interested in town. And it gets wild. The first part of the book was okay. I was kind of reading it, this is a 3.5 star book. But by the end, the last few chapters were just so crazy, so brutal. And then you kind of realize what's going on. And man, it's intense. And that bumped it up to 4.5 stars. The main reason why it's not getting 5 stars, because I feel like it probably is a 5-star book, is because I will never reread this book again. Like, I read it once, that's enough. Like, it was really good, but like, I don't need to read that again. So that's the main reason. But it was a solid book, great book, 4.5 stars, and probably, besides rereads, my favorite book that I read in September. All right, so that is my September wrap up. All of the books that I read and did not finish in the month I can't talk today. In the month of September. So yeah, it was kind of an up and down month. Like, I had some bad books, or books, that I didn't really end up liking, and some big disappointments. But I also had some fun rereads and some new favorites. So yeah, overall, like I said, kind of a mixed month, but I would say it's a success because I found some new favorites. And yeah, so now what do I do? It's been so long since I filmed. Yeah, it's been hard for me to like get the energy to film because I've been working so much. And then, like I said, I drove to Indiana and back this past few days. And yeah, I just need to try to find the time to do it, but it's hard to balance work and reading and then try to find time to film. So I'll try to do better, but I definitely wanted to at least get this video out and hopefully some more this month. But yeah, definitely let me guys know if you've read any of the books that I read in September, what you thought about them, or if you're interested in them. Comment down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, like and subscribe. And I got my Patreon, which I mentioned. If you're a Patreon member, you get put on the wheel spin, and you get a chance to pick any book you want me to read. Just like Andrew, I DNF'd his first pick, but then his second pick ended up being a start to a new favorite fantasy series, potentially. So yeah, that'll be fun. I've also got my Amazon wish list if you want to buy me any books. Not that I need any, but I'll take them. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a fantastic day.